Everyone has a story. Stories have power. They help us understand each other. This is Jessop's Journal. Hey, Candy, great to see you.
Hey, how are you, Doug?
Excellent. Let's go chat. Candy, it's time to sign into Jessop's Journal.
Oh, all right.
Hi, I'm Doug Jessop. In this episode of Jessop's Journal, I have Candy Kinser with me today. Candy, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
Now, you are dressed in, this little white outfit, and, I'm not sure you're an angel or something, but some people may have called you an angel. Why are you wearing the white?
Well, this is what I do every day. I'm a nurse.
Ah, very cool. Okay, so my grandmother was a nurse, and I actually have this book, not totally serious, on the proper care and use of leaches. Ooh, okay. So, I don't know if they still use leeches or not, but what kind of nurse are you?
I am a hospice nurse.
What's a hospice nurse do?
We protect people.
Okay.
We protect their opportunity to have the kind of life they want and live life to the fullest towards the end of their life.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you're talking some pretty deep stuff. Now, how long have you been a nurse?
I've been a nurse since 1996.
Okay, did you start as a hospice nurse?
No, at the time, I wanted to work with children, so I worked at Children's Hospital in Oklahoma City.
Wow.
And after a year of working there, I just had this feeling, this desire to go into intensive care. And so I went to work at St. Anthony's. That's the hospital where all the bombing victims, most of them came after the bombing in Oklahoma City. But after that, after being there for the better part of a year, I just had a feeling, I don't know, it was a prompting, hospice. Just went into my head.
Wow.
And started investigating hospice. And the first nurse I followed was a hospice nurse who had been working as a nurse for 32 years and a hospice nurse for 4. And I loved what I saw, Doug.
Why so?
Her patients were comfortable. They were in their own home. They were surrounded by family. They looked forward to her visit. She was doing things to help them be comfortable and to be happy. And that, I thought, wow, this is so cool. Because although I was a nurse and I cared about my patients, the time I had to spend with them was limited. Things got very busy in the intensive care.
Well, yeah, I got to think that the intensive care units are even busier right now because of COVID. For you, what does being a nurse in a hospital mean?
Well, it means you're going to work hard. You're going to have a day where you go in and you're assigned in the intensive care unit 2 patients.
Okay.
But then someone calls in sick, someone else needs to go to lunch, someone needs to take a patient down to x-ray. The next thing you know, you're taking care of 4 patients.
Wow.
And you sometimes are titrating drugs, so you have to be monitoring your patient. It gets pretty intense. But it also means that you bond with those patients as soon as you meet them. I mean, you may go in and, honey, I'm going to be your nurse today. I don't even know if that's correct to say that, but we get pretty close pretty quick because in the next few seconds, you may be giving them a bed bath, and you need to be able to connect with them quickly.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have to admit, you have a job that I couldn't do, and so I have a lot of respect for first responders and the nursing profession. We've talked a little bit about the fact that you were an intensive care nurse, and now you're a hospice care nurse. So for the people out there that don't quite understand what hospice means, can you help fill me in?
To me, hospice is just everything I'd ever want to do because we make such a difference. We get to throw away cookbook medicine and we get to do what makes sense. And we get to protect those bonding moments that are so precious towards the end of life. And you know, Doug, there's no end to hospice. A lot of people think, oh, hospice means you're going to die in a few days, you're going to die in a few weeks, you only have a few months left. But I've known patients to be on hospice significantly longer than that because they continue to technically qualify. We recently just had a patient who the hospital expected her to live maybe 3 days. We brought her home from the hospital where she could be with her husband, and she lived 3 weeks.
To you, just not even just as a hospice nurse, but just as you as a person, what does quality of life mean to you?
Connection, connection with other human beings.
Okay.
And that's kind of a challenge sometimes for our patients right now with COVID.
Yeah.
But to these patients and to me, well, having someone give you eye-to-eye contact, have someone, hearing the voices of your loved ones around you, that's huge. Dying people are really cool and they know what matters in life.
Okay.
It's not the stock market. It's not even their favorite sports team. It's love, family, loved ones, peace.
Well, I do admit, one of my favorite interviews that I've done was with this 103-year-old woman.
I saw it.
By the name of Romaine.
Choice,
You know, and
Romaine.
she was doing wonderful, sharp as a tack, 103 years old, and she had a fall. And you know, shortly after that, she passed peacefully in her sleep. So I had no idea, but it was intriguing because, like you said, with her, it wasn't about the stuff. It was about, you know, spending time with her dad, you know, or the spaghetti that her son made, or that bowling trophy, and of course, you know, the two hole-in-ones. But I got to think that you've heard lots of different stories, and in fact, you've written down a bunch of stories. Why is it important to you to keep these stories passed down, keep them alive?
I want people to know that some of the things I've learned working in this area, this rich area of hospice, it's enriched my life so much because you learn, number one, what really matters in life. That's huge.
Okay.
You also learn that you don't have to be afraid of death because our bodies know how to die. But some of those stories, I mean, I have to credit my husband. Bob kept telling me, I'd come home and tell him these amazing stories that our patients were sharing with me. Just such cool things. And he'd say, Candy, you got to write those down. And he wouldn't let me. So I started writing them down, and it took me about 4 years.
Do you mind sharing one of your favorites?
Oh boy, I have a lot, but Blaine always stands out in my mind.
Okay, tell me about
Blaine was in a facility, a long-term care facility, and people there don't go there by choice. Some things cause them, maybe they've had a stroke or whatever, but they're not usually really happy to be there. And one day I got a call. I was Blaine's hospice nurse. I got a call and they said, Candy, Blaine's dying, get over here as fast as you can. He's as blue as the sky. So I got there and he didn't die. And when he could talk, he told me what had happened. And he said, Candy, my wife was here. Now that got my attention because she had died in that very same room just a few years earlier. He said she stood right there by the closet and she held out her hands and she said, Blaine, won't you come and join me? And he said, I had to tell her my work on earth wasn't finished yet. And it wasn't, he lived for another year.
Really?
Yeah, but after that, he was the happiest man I ever knew. And he had told me some more things. He said, Candy, she was gorgeous. She was beautiful. She looked like she was about 23, and her hair was long down over her shoulders. And I think the thing that made him so happy, Doug, was he knew he would die. He was that close to the end of his life. And he knew when it was his time, she would be there waiting with her arms. And it gives me hope. That gives me great hope to know that. And that we have an incredible destiny waiting ahead of us. That this is my belief, after having worked in hospice so many years, that this life isn't the end.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. What isn't hospice?
Hospice isn't cookbook medicine. In a hospice, we do what makes sense. You know, there's a lot of procedures in medicine, aggressive procedures. Some of them aren't comfortable. Some of them are just necessary at certain stages in life to prolong life. And a lot of medicine is cookbook medicine. You know, you open up that Merck Index and you do exactly what it says, the Merck manual. But in hospice, our doctors do what makes sense. And our whole focus is on comfort and quality of life, which I keep saying that phrase, but that's what our whole focus is. And where do you go to where you have a whole medical team, doctors, nurses, social workers, chaplains, aides, and they sit around this table every week and they look at your med chart and your chart, and the doc says, well, tell me, how is Romaine doing today? And how is she feeling? And they review your meds, and they say, what can we do to tweak things so that she'll feel better? When you get that many caring people together in a room, talking around a table, it's amazing what we come up with. And we're experts. We're experts in palliative care. And it's cathartic for us too, because sometimes, well, we cry a lot in hospice.
Yeah.
We weep with our families when that time comes. And so to get together and discuss those things, it's a joy to work with that team of people.
I think that sometimes we tend to be afraid of things that we don't understand, we don't know, and I don't know about you, but I have not died, anytime recently that I'm aware of. And so I think everybody's kind of wondering, it's that unknown and such. With the people that you work with, let's first talk about the caregivers, the family members. What are the questions that you get asked the most? I mean, what are people wondering?
Well, what a great question. They want to know what's going to happen. They're scared. They're grieving already. Sometimes they've already been saying goodbye to grandma or grandpa a little bit at a time, and they're worried about what's coming. So one of the things we like to let them know, and is that our bodies know how to do this, that a whole different set of rules kicks in. You've never done this, but if you had a baby, you would know that you didn't wake up one day and say, today I'm going to soften my cervix so this baby can come. There's just a whole different set of rules kicks in. Our bodies know how to die, and somehow, gently, it's not something we always bring up right when we go in that first day. When we first go in, we just want to find out what's been going on, how can we help, what do you need? But eventually the time comes where we provide that information about this whole different set of rules that kicks in. And because we respect what their patient and what their body's telling us, we can make this a very comfortable time for them.
Okay, well, if you don't mind me delving a little deeper, what are some of those signs and steps? How do you know that someone's dying?
Our bodies know how to do this. When I was a little, can I go back to when I was a little girl? I can remember crawling into bed one night and thinking, what is death like? We're all gonna get there eventually. What's that like? And I knew that when you die, you don't breathe. So I thought, I'm gonna see what it's like. So I crawled under my covers and I held my breath. And then, naturally, eventually, you gasp for air, and I thought, oh, to die must be the worst thing in the world. But I've learned that's not the case. Our bodies, in a very systematic fashion, close down one body system after another until ultimately you don't need any more oxygen, and then you take a last peaceful breath. But that's if your caregiver respects your own body and works with your body to do what it naturally knows how to do. You can, when the blood pressure, it's time for it to naturally and gradually come down. As a nurse, I could hang a bag of dobutamine or Dobutrex and force it back up, which would force fluid in the lungs, and then I'd have to run in the room and suction you, and I'd look really important, but I'd be causing some of those problems. So what the body does, eventually, patients who used to be fascinated with all kind of extraneous things, they seem to need a more inward focus. They're willing to just sort of sit and ponder and reminisce and maybe nap more than they used to. Patients who used to want to go to this restaurant or that restaurant and get have a big buffet and a big steak. Now, a little pudding, a little applesauce, because digestion's hard work. Yeah. And as we approach this time, the body, although I love it, the body doesn't consider it a priority anymore. So their appetite declines. That's part of this whole GI system beginning to close down. Sometimes, consistent with that, the ability to swallow it's a reflex swallowing. It's not as acute, and they may choke a little bit. You may see that happening a little more as they eat. Patients who used to, oh, I have to see this show, they're more interested in just being peaceful. And the families will tell us, Grandma's sleeping more than she used to. She's napping more. That's okay. That's okay. If that's what she wants to do, I mean, there are drugs we could perk her up, but if that's what she wants to do, that's what she needs. Patients who used to, I don't know, just talk and talk and talk, all they want to do is have their loved ones close. And they are cool people. They know what's important in life. And it's having loved ones around them and hearing those voices. But other things will happen. Eventually their vital signs will change. And although when I go into a home and someone says, you know, Grandma wouldn't even drink anything this morning, and she's always loved her juice, I know maybe she's entering what all our patients are dying, but maybe she's entering the active dying phase. And at that stage, they don't experience hunger or thirst like you and I do. You know, if you, Doug, didn't drink for 3 days, I mean, we would be crawling around on the ground just miserable or dead. But they can go a whole week without taking in 1 drop of fluid.
Really?
Yes. And if we didn't eat, we would be so miserable. No, if you try to feed someone in that stage, they will often clamp their lips shut. It's a reflex. The body knows what to do, and it's not a priority during that last week of life. It's not quite time to leave yet. The last great work we do on earth is to become this magnet, this magnet that draws in our loved ones, and they come in and they have this bonding experience where they'll start pulling out journals or photograph albums. And it's just really cool to see. So the body compensates. The blood pressure goes up. The heart rate goes up. The temperature goes up. You're breathing 12 times a minute probably. They may be breathing 24, and then the next day 34, and then the next day 44 times a minute to keep them here. But another thing that happens before that, the leg strength goes. Arm strength lingers a little longer because arms are important for hugs. But the leg strength will go, and a patient who was running around the house, now they're not doing that anymore because the body knows it's important to shunt all that oxygen to the more vital organs like the brain and the heart and the lungs.
I remember having a conversation a number of years ago with an EMT. And he would go on these calls, you know, accident calls and everything. And he had a strong philosophy that when it's your time, it's your time. So he told me about going to these accidents where it was just like mangled and mess, and you're going, there's no way in the world anybody's going to be able to survive this. And yet they walked away.
Absolutely.
And then he goes to a fender bender that, yeah, no big deal. And the person passed. Has that ever kind of, you know, come into your world between the emergency room and the hospice stuff? Absolutely.
Yeah, it has. You know, my husband was a paramedic, and so he would come home and tell me all kind of stories. And it is amazing. I have seen people who we felt for sure. One gentleman, head-on crash, I-15, and I think there were times when he wished he could have died because of the pain. In that kind of situation, as nurses, we'll do whatever we have to because he still had a chance at life, and we wanted to give him that because he was relatively young. And he can tell you some amazing things that happened, but basically he was told, it's not your time yet. He actually was told, you got to go back. And patients have told me that too. One of my patients, and he gave me permission to use his name, Evan Chittister, coming down Highway 6, Spanish Fort Canyon. When I met him, he was in the hospital, and he said, Candy, I've died twice.
Really?
And he ended up having 83 units of blood and 18 surgeries.
Wow.
His leg had to be amputated. That motorcycle accident was horrible, but the experiences he had were incredible. He saw this. Can I share something this deeply spiritual? He saw this ball of light coming towards him, and there were 2 specks that were even brighter than this bright ball of light coming towards him. He thought it was going to mow him over. It stopped right in front of him. And he was given this incredible hug, and he felt a love that he said nothing earthly can describe, and a peace that was the sweetest thing he ever experienced. When the person who gave him that stood back, he was able then to see who had been in that ball. It was his father and his grandfather. And his grandfather, well, basically they told him he had to go back, and he was like, I don't want to go back. I'm going to be in a lot of pain. I'm going to suffer. Please let me stay here. And they said, you'll be given the strength to endure what you need to do. He became the greatest scoutmaster. He helped so many boys in his life, and he's so loved in that part of Utah where he made such a difference. So thank goodness he had the courage to come back. But what an incredible life experience that would be.
Wow.
And then there's other people that, well, you just don't expect it to happen, but they're gone. And something tells you it was their time. I really believe that.
That's kind of crazy. Well, you know, the thing that I look at is that we all kind of leave marks in this life. And, you know, it's that legacy, it's those kind of things that we leave behind. And so the folks at Restico make my journals. You know, it's Jessop's journal. You got to have a journal, right?
Oh, wow.
They have an interesting little hashtag that I really like. And so this is the question I ask everybody that I have on. Candy, how do you want to leave your mark?
Well, since we've been talking a lot about nursing here, I want to make a difference in the people's ability to bond with their loved ones. And I want to thank every person in medicine and at the hospitals that make this possible, that make it possible for someone to be with their family, to be with their loved ones, whether that is an intimate family or whether that's just someone that's made a huge difference in their life. I want to protect those moments because I had a situation once, and it was in a hospital. It wasn't a Utah hospital, but my patient died, and we had originally coded the patient, and the family said, don't do that anymore. And I was sitting at the nurse's station, and I saw this flat line go across the monitor, and so I went in to let them know that their grandma had died. And they said, but she's still breathing. And I said, no, that's just the ventilator pushing in air. And it might be a while before our resident got there who had the authority to turn that off. You know what they said to me, Doug?
No.
Oh. It was so unnatural. There was so much separating them from the grandma. There was monitors going off. There was tube feedings. There were lines everywhere. There was big high bed rails. There was so much separating them, and I just didn't feel right. But that first doctor I told you that died, his daughter, when she walked through that door to be with him, because I had called her to let her know, this is it. I mean, his whole facial affect changed, even though he was in a coma. His eyebrows arched, and I know he knew she was there. And she was able to go to him and tell him, Daddy, I love you. Daddy, forgive me. Daddy, thank you. Those things that matter most. And when he did take his last breath, she knew it. And she turned to her husband, and he hugged her, and they cried. And I knew this doctor gave this daughter a precious gift. And so I practically ran back to my agency, and I said, Gracie, the nurse that trained me, I did it. I called in the family at the right time, and they were able to say goodbye. And I don't understand, though. I never had to suction him, and his breathing never got agonal. And she said, Candy, that's what hospice is all about. So professionally, that's how I'd like to leave my mark.
Well said. Thank you so much for coming on Jessop's Journal today. There's a couple other people we got to thank. That guy over there, he's walking around. There he is. It's Ed.
Hey, Ed.
Ed is my videographer and my collaborator. He does all my stories, and you know, he's the guy that makes us look good and sound good, and so I very much appreciate him. Of course, we've got the hand sanitizer folks, you know, with Ogden's own distillery. And yes, they do make some adult beverages. Of course, Spry keeps me moisturized. Now, here's the thing. Okay, you're a nurse. Okay, you're going to think this is kind of funky, but okay, people think about washing their hands. Okay, but have you truly ever thought about washing your nose? Okay.
Wow, that would be so helpful,
I mean,
especially nowadays.
Oh, exactly. So the folks at Clear help out there. And then, of course, Rustico Taylor Cooperative makes all my suits. And yes, my favorite hatter, JW Custom Hats. Here's the thing I want people to remember. Stories have power, especially this one. They help us understand each other. With another entry into Jessop's Journal and Candy Kinser, I'm Doug Jessop, ABC4 News.